So to begin with, why Oxford and Cambridge are universities that I think you should consider. In many ways, we teach students like every university does. So you'll have lectures, which are a little bit like this. You'll have classes, which are smaller group teaching, and seminars, which are quite similar. And if you do a science subject, you'll have practicals. But the thing that really makes Oxford and Cambridge special is that, as well as all of that, you're taught in very, very small groups. So in Oxford, we call them tutorials. In Cambridge, we call them supervisions, but it's the same thing. So very, very small group teaching. You'll be in a group of either 2 or 3 students with a tutor, and you'll meet for usually 2 or 3 hours a week. And that will really be the focus of your week. So that's what you do your work for. So in any essay-based subjects, you can expect to write 1 or 2 essays a week for your tutorials. In science subjects, you'll do problem sheets or maths problems or something similar, again for your tutorials. And the tutorial is where the tutor will give you your work back, give you comments on what you did, how you could improve. If you didn't understand something, they can explain it. And you're only in a group of 2 or 3, so it's a really good opportunity to get someone to explain it without it being embarrassing and having to put your hand up in a lecture. And then if there was a debate about what the right interpretation or the right answer is, or if you disagree with the other person in your tutorial, you'll have a conversation about that. So you get to have a really good in-depth academic conversation with somebody who will be a good teacher, but also will be someone who does research in the subject that you're studying. And Oxford and Cambridge are both what's called research-intensive universities, which means that as well as teaching students, our academics also do research into a particular subject area. And many of our academics are world-class researchers. And they do actually teach students. So not just in the occasional big lecture, but they'll teach you in small group tutorials. You'll get to know them really well. Often you'll even get to hear about their research before it's been published. So you get fantastic access to world-class academics, and that's the thing that really sets Oxford and Cambridge apart from other universities, I think. The other thing that makes it a bit unusual is the amount of independent study you're expected to do. So your work for these tutorials or supervisions is largely self-directed. So there will be lectures which will help, and you might have some seminars or classes for certain things, but you will be expected to read stuff, think about it, and produce essays or problem sheets without a lot of direction apart from in your tutorials. So you need to be reasonably independent. We do have fantastic facilities to help you do that. So we've got fantastic library facilities. Both Oxford and Cambridge have what's called copyright libraries, which means that they get a copy of every single book that gets published in England. Oxford's had the right to that since 1610. So we've got somewhere between 11 and 12 million books. We've got literally everything. So all the academic books you'll ever need, but also all the fiction books, all the kids' books, all the newspapers and magazines, everything is in Oxford's libraries somewhere. We also have fantastic science facilities, so both universities have invested a lot of money in state-of-the-art science facilities and labs and lecture facilities. So they're fantastic universities in terms of resources. Other stuff to be aware of, they are relatively exam-based. So I said that you have to do an essay each week or possibly 2 essays a week for most essay-based subjects. That's true, but those essays don't count towards your final mark. So they will be assessed, but your final marks are largely based on end-of-year and end-of-course exams. There are some opportunities for coursework, and in the sciences you'll normally do a big research project at some point. But still, compared with some universities, we've got a relatively exam-focused system, and we're not modular, so you can't really retake modules. So another thing that makes Oxford and Cambridge unusual is that they're what's called collegiate universities. And that means that when you become a member of Oxford University, you also become a member of a particular college. And the things that colleges all have, so they all have accommodation. In Cambridge, they'll give you accommodation for at least 3 years of your course. In Oxford, they'll give you at least 2 years and often 3 years of your course. They'll have a common room, they'll have a library, they'll have a bar, they'll have a dining hall, so you can have 3 meals a day if you want to. They'll have some sort of sports facilities. So they're like a miniature university of their own, but they're very small. So colleges vary in size, but in Oxford they vary between about 80 students in a year group and 150 students in a year group. In Cambridge they vary between about 60 and 200 students. So they're pretty small. They're not subject specific, so most colleges will offer most courses. So you'll meet people from a range of different subjects within your college. And it's a really, really good way to get to know people, to make friends, to have a nice little community to go back to. But you're not restricted to your college. You can go into other colleges. It's fairly easy to make friends with people in other colleges. And a lot of facilities are open to everybody. So all your lectures are shared with people across all colleges who do your subject. And any labs are shared across all colleges. And there are university sports facilities and things like that. But the college is where you actually live. So it's where your home will be. So the things that differentiate the colleges and something to think about when you're applying, the subjects they offer. So I said most do most subjects. They don't all do absolutely everything. And the prospectus will tell you which ones are open to you depending on what course you want to do. Their size and number of students, so their physical size varies a lot. So I work for St Peter's College, which is one of the medium size in terms of student numbers in Oxford. So we have about 110 students in a year. But in terms of the physical space we take up, we're pretty small. Location, so some are right in the centre of the city, some are a bit further out. Don't worry too much about that though. So in Oxford, none of them are more than a 15-minute walk from the city centre. In Cambridge, all but one are within a 15-minute walk of the city centre. So it's still going to be pretty easy to get everywhere, regardless of which college you're at. And then specific facilities. So they'll all have the same basic stuff, but if there's something very particular you're interested in, you might want to look at what facilities they have. So, for instance, a few colleges have their own squash courts, a few have got a drama studio. In Cambridge, one of them's got a swimming pool, although before you get too excited, it's outside and it's not heated. So it's basically like a really big pot of water. So there are various things that vary between them. And then appearance. So some are very, very old. Some are, in Oxford, some are 800 years old. Some are much more modern. But basically, the academic experience you'll have will be very similar, regardless of which college you end up at. So choosing a course. Hopefully most of you have got some idea of what course you want to do. Both Oxford and Cambridge offer quite a wide range of courses. We don't offer exactly the same courses. So some things are only done at one university, and some things with the same name will be quite different at Oxford and Cambridge. But things to think about. What are your academic interests? Do you meet the course requirements? So they're in the prospectus, or you can ask me, or you can ask Rosie on the Cambridge stand today. What's the course structure? Is it what you want to study? Are the compulsory things the things that you want to cover? And do you like, or at least not dislike, the assessment that we're going to use? And then what prospects do you get? So the vast majority of Oxford and Cambridge's courses will prepare you for a really wide range of jobs. Most of them aren't specifically designed to prepare you for a particular job, with the exception of medicine and veterinary medicine. So most of them are going to prepare you for a wide range of careers. And we have generally fairly academic courses, so there will be practical elements to some of them, but they're more academic and traditional than perhaps the average subject. So what we're looking for in applicants? Well, firstly, do you want to study the course? You need to actually be genuinely enthusiastic about it. There's a big difference between being enthusiastic about studying law as an academic discipline and being enthusiastic about being a lawyer. It's fine if you're enthusiastic about being a lawyer, but we want, if you apply for law, for you to be enthusiastic about studying it as an academic discipline. And that's really important. So we want you to actually want to study the subject for its own sake. Will you enjoy the teaching environment? Are you the kind of person who's enthusiastic about the idea of being taught through supervisions or tutorials? And are you going to get the entry requirements? So for Cambridge, the standard entry requirement at A level is an A star and 2 A's. For Oxford, it depends on the course. So it's 2 A stars and an A for maths. It's an A star and 2 A's for all the sciences, plus geography and economics and management. And then it's 3 A's for everything else. If you have any specific questions about that, you can ask me at the end and I can tell you. And I can tell you what it is in different qualifications as well. So you need to be predicted the grades we're going to ask for. You need to want to study the course. That's the most important thing. The application process. The application process is very, very similar to the process for other universities. The main difference from your perspective now is that the deadline's earlier. So for most universities, you've got until January to send your UCAS form. But for Oxford or Cambridge, you've got to send it in by the 15th of October. And your school may have a slightly earlier deadline than that because they have to attach their reference to it. So once you've submitted your form, if you're applying to Cambridge, they will then send you another form to fill in, which asks for quite a lot of information. The most important thing on there from their perspective is your AS/UMS scores. So the individual number you got in each AS and how many times you've sat it. Oxford doesn't ask for that information and therefore we don't use it. Then for some subjects you'll be asked to send in written work, so that's usually essay-based subjects. And for some subjects, particularly at Oxford, you'll be asked to sit a test. and these happen in your school or college in November. Then we look at all the information we've got on you so far, so your UCAS form, the SAQ if you've applied to Cambridge, any written work you've sent, any tests you've sat, and decide who to shortlist for interview. And that works slightly differently at Oxford and Cambridge. So at Oxford we interview between 60 and 70% of the applicants. You won't get a place without being interviewed. In Cambridge they interview about 90% of applicants. It does vary a lot depending on the subject you apply for. And then you come to interview usually in the first 2 weeks in December, and then we look at all the information on you again and decide who to offer a place to, and we'll write to you in early January. And then it's the same as every other university. Offers will be conditional on certain grades at A-level or whatever you're taking. So if it's Oxford, we'll probably say you need to get an A-star and 2 A's at A-level. And if you get that in August, then you start in October. So it sounds like a really long and complicated process, and it is a little bit complicated. But actually it's only a year from sending your form to starting at university. So in under a year and a half, you could be students at Oxford and Cambridge. It's not actually that far away at all, which is quite a frightening thought. And I'm sure some of you will be students at Oxford and Cambridge in a year and a half. So the interview is the thing that a lot of people get really concerned about. What tutors are looking for is academic potential. How we judge academic potential is going to depend on what the course is. So for some courses that's going to be analytical ability, how you think, whether you can think logically. For some courses it's going to be much more about mathematical ability. For some it might be creativity. But in all the courses, we're not trying to judge how much you already know in your head, as long as you know what you're supposed to know for your ASs. So you're expected, particularly in the sciences, to be able to remember your AS exam content, but you're not expected to know more than that, unless you've written on your UCAS form that you're interested in a particular subject, in which case we assume that you do have at least 5 minutes of conversation about it. Other than that, we're looking for whether you can think in a way that's useful for the subject. We're also looking at your academic ability, obviously. We want to know that you predicted the right grades. But more important than that, we're looking at your potential. So it's not just that you're doing well now, but that with more time and more tuition, you could do even better and become a really, really outstanding student. Motivation, commitment to the course. We want to know that you do actually want to study it, that you're genuinely enthusiastic. An ability to think independently and critically. So what we don't want to see is that you just tell us what your teachers have taught you. We want to see that you actually think for yourself. And in an interview, what we're trying to do is to get you to a point where you're having to think in the interview rather than just tell us what you already know. So it's not a fact test. It's not like University Challenge. We're not going to fire random questions at you and wait for your answer and then fire new random academic questions at you. What we're going to do is try to get you to have a grown-up academic conversation about some area of the subject you're applying for. And interviews are always done by subject specialists, so it will be somebody who would teach the subject if you got in. And then there are subject-specific selection criteria depending on what course you're actually applying for. We don't ask trick questions. There are loads of myths about Oxford and Cambridge interviews. You can see some sample interview questions on Oxford's website, and Cambridge has some videos of mock interviews. They genuinely do want to try and get the best out of you. So we're not going to ask you trick questions, and it's not a pass or fail thing. When you leave the room from the interview, we don't tick a box that says yes or no. That's definitely not how it works. So it's considered alongside all the other information we've got on you as well. And in most cases, you'll have at least 2 interviews. So we'll have 2 chances to see how well you can perform. So what information are we looking at when we decide who to offer a place to? So your academic record so far, so that includes your GCSEs, your AS levels and your A-level predictions, or whatever qualification you're taking. In Oxford, we look particularly closely at your GCSE results. In Cambridge, they look more closely at your AS results. We look at your personal statement, and in that what we want to see is why you want to do the course. That's the most important thing. We look at the reference that your teachers have written for you. We look at written work if we've asked for it. We look at test results if we've asked for those. And then we look at the interview as well, and some contextual information about the performance of the school you've come from. So we look at all this information when we're deciding who to offer a place to, and there's no one thing that will definitely get you a place or get you turned down for a place. The only thing that would definitely get you turned down is if you're not predicted the grades we ask for. Everything else will depend on the individual picture. But it is a competition. we can't offer places to everyone who applies. So on average, about 1 in 5 people get a place at Oxford and the same number at Cambridge. So it is competitive. If you apply to Cambridge, something slightly complicated can happen, which is called the winter pool. And what that means is that in early January, you'll get a letter saying that your application has been placed in the pool. It means you haven't got a place initially at the college that you were being considered by, but that they thought you were really good and they want to give other colleges the opportunity to consider you. And then you may well be offered a place a few weeks later. So it's basically a second round. In Oxford, we don't do that, but we do have the same process. It just happens behind the scenes in December whilst you're already in Oxford for interview. So one of the differences between the two processes is that for Cambridge, you normally just go for 1 day of interviews, whereas in Oxford, we keep you in Oxford for 2 or 3 days normally. And in that time, you'll have probably up to 4 interviews. So we have more opportunities to see you during that period, and you may be considered by more than one college then. And overall, as I said, 1 in 5 people gets a place. So what we're interested in is anything you can show us that gives us evidence that you're interested in the subject. And that can be all sorts of things. So for some subjects, that might be work experience. Work experience is particularly important for medicine and veterinary medicine, but it's not that important for other subjects. For other subjects, it could be reading books, it could be coming to a lecture, it could be thinking, it could be an extended project. There are all sorts of different things you can do. But basically, we don't mind whether you're head girl or anything like that. All those things might well be great, and we're certainly not going to hold them against you, and other universities might care about them. But from the point of view of our admissions process, they're not going to be very important. So if you want to find out more, Oxford and Cambridge have lots of prospectuses, and I've got absolutely loads downstairs, so please do come and get one from me later on. You can get a lot more information on both university websites, so ox.ac.uk or cam.ac.uk, and you'll find loads of stuff on there. And then come to an open day. So the next open days in Oxford are the 26th and 27th of June. You can just turn up on the day. Some talks require you to book in advance, and if you want free accommodation or lunch, you need to get on with booking a place, probably by the end of this week. For Cambridge, the open days are the 4th and 5th of July, and the same applies. You do need to book for the Cambridge ones. And then if you want to come on a separate day, that's absolutely fine. You can contact the admissions officers, or you can contact me if you want to. So I'm at St Peter's College. My details are all over the place in the prospectus, but I'm schools@spc.ox.ac.uk, and you're welcome to contact me if you've got any particular questions.